Long before cities rose or nations fell, there were people who lived by the rhythm of stone and water. They gathered at the edges of marshlands where reeds grew tall and thick, their roots drinking deep from ancient earth. Not just survivors in a harsh world, but artists and innovators who transformed rawhide into something precious and enduring. One of the greatest technologies of the Stone Age were not weapons, but the quiet wisdom of preservation itself. This is the story of the hide tanners, whose hands turned death into life, whose craft whispered secrets across 10,000 years. The reed beds stretched endlessly beneath skies that had never known the smoke of industry or the roar of engines. In the Mesolithic dawn, when the great ice had finally retreated northward, these wetlands became sanctuaries of abundance and innovation. Our ancestors came here not by chance, but by deep knowledge passed down through generations like precious stone tools. They understood what the reeds could teach them, what the water could give them, what the earth would reveal to those who listened. The work began with death, as it always did in those unforgiving times when survival demanded using every part of what was taken. A deer had fallen to skilled hunters, its meat already divided among the clan, its bones destined for needles and scrapers. But the hide, that precious skin that had kept the animal warm through bitter winters, held potential beyond simple covering. Fresh hide is useless, stiff as wood when it dries, rotting to foulness if left untreated in the dampness of the marsh. The tanners knew this ancient truth, had learned it from their mothers and grandmothers stretching back into the mists of time. They carried the skin to the water's edge where reeds whispered in the wind, sharing secrets older than human memory. The first lesson was patience, for transformation cannot be rushed no matter how desperately the cold season approaches or hunger gnaws. They scraped the hide clean with flint blades sharper than any modern steel, each stroke a meditation on the nature of change. Blood and fat came away in ribbons, falling to the earth where beetles and worms would return them to the eternal cycle. Then came the soaking, submerging the skin in pools where tannins leached from oak bark, turned the water dark as old blood. Tannins, those bitter compounds that trees make to protect themselves, became the alchemical key to preserving what would otherwise decay. The hide tanners had discovered through countless experiments and failures that certain plants held this transformative power within their cells. Oak bark was precious, willow roots were valuable, but the reeds themselves whispered a different kind of wisdom to those who understood. For weeks the hide would soak and soften, fibers relaxing as chemical bonds reformed into something more stable and lasting than living skin. Have you ever wondered how our ancestors learned which plants held the secret to stopping rot, to making leather that could last for years? They watched and learned from nature itself, from the dark water where fallen leaves lay preserved for seasons, from the bog bodies that time forgot to claim. The reed beds became laboratories of innovation, where observation and experimentation happened not in sterile rooms but in the living world. Children learned by watching, their small hands eventually joining in the work, carrying forward knowledge that would echo through millennia. The tanners worked in groups, their voices rising in songs that helped mark time and rhythm, that made the endless labor something shared and sacred. They stretched the hides on wooden frames, pulling them taut so every part would receive equal treatment from sun and smoke and patient hands. Smoke from carefully tended fires drifted over the skins, adding another layer of preservation, another barrier against the inevitable decay that claimed all things. The smoke carried the scent of burning oak and birch, of herbs gathered from the marshland, of human ingenuity transforming the raw into the refined. This was technology as profound as any computer or spacecraft. This knowledge of how to make dead things useful, how to extend survival through the harshest seasons. Winter came hard in those days, when the last ice age still held the north in its frozen grip and cold could kill as surely as any predator. The leather they created became clothing that breathed and flexed, that kept precious warmth close to skin while allowing sweat to escape into the air. It became shelter, sewn into tents that could be packed and carried as the herds migrated and the seasons turned. Their endless wheel. It became containers for water and food, bags and pouches that made it possible to carry resources across the trackless wilderness. Without this craft, without these patient workers at the reed beds, human expansion across the continents would have been impossible to achieve. The tanners were as essential as the hunters, as vital as those who made fire or knapped flint into tools that could cut and scrape. Yet their names are lost to us now, their individual stories erased by the vast weight of time that crushes all but stone and bone. What remains are the traces they left behind, the scraping tools found in ancient middens, the preserved fragments of worked leather in oxygen-starved bogs. Archaeologists have found evidence of hide working at sites across Europe and Asia, wherever reeds grew and humans gathered in those distant days. The tools are simple but effective, each one shaped by countless hours of use, worn smooth by hands that knew their purpose with absolute certainty. Flint scrapers with carefully worked edges, bone awls for punching holes, stone weights to keep hide submerged in the tanning pools. These are the physical remnants of a craft that required no written language, no formal schools, just observation and practice, and the wisdom of elders. The reed beds themselves were chosen with care, for not all wetlands were equal in the eyes of those who understood the land. They needed flowing water to carry away the waste products of tanning, to keep the pools from becoming stagnant and foul with rot. They needed reeds in abundance, those tall plants whose roots helped filter the water, whose stems could be woven into mats and baskets. They needed access to the oak forests where bark could be harvested without killing the trees. Sustainable use before that word existed. The tanners understood ecology in their bones, knew that taking too much would leave them with nothing. That balance was the key to survival. This was the second great lesson the reed beds taught, that humans are part of nature, not separate from it or masters over it. What if we could recover that ancient wisdom, that understanding of our place within the web of life rather than above it? The seasons turned and turned again, and the tanners worked through spring floods and summer heat, through autumn harvests and winter's deep freeze. Each hide was different, each one requiring slight adjustments to the process, teaching the workers to read leather like others read the sky or tracks. Deer hide was soft and supple, perfect for clothing that needed to move with the body through long days of gathering and hunting. Boar hide was thick and tough, better suited for bags and belts and things that needed to resist wear and tearing from rough use. Oryx hide, from those massive wild cattle that once thundered across the plains, was strong enough to make shields and armor against weapons and weather. Not just different animals, but different ages and conditions produced hides with distinct qualities that the tanners learned to recognize and utilize. A young deer killed in summer had thinner skin than an old stag taken in winter, when fat and fur provided insulation against the cold. The tanners became masters of transformation, turning what nature provided into what human survival demanded, adapting their craft to available resources. They experimented constantly, trying new plans for tanning, new techniques for softening, new combinations of smoke and oil and patient working. Failures were common. Hides that rotted despite treatment, leather that cracked and split when it should have remained supple and strong. But each failure taught a lesson, each mistake refined the process. And over centuries the craft approached something like perfection within its limits. The knowledge spread as people moved, as clans met and traded not just goods but ideas, as marriages carried wisdom from one group to another, from the reed beds of northern Europe to the marshlands of Asia. Similar techniques emerged independently or through cultural exchange across vast distances. Humans everywhere faced the same challenge of preserving hide, and humans everywhere discovered that plants and patience held the answer to that challenge. The tanners at the reed beds were part of a global story, a species-wide innovation that happened not in one place but in many, not once but repeatedly. This is how human culture evolved, not through lone geniuses but through countless small improvements shared across generations. And geography, the leather they produced became currency in some places, valuable enough to trade for flint from distant quarries or obsidian from volcanic regions. A well-made hide could buy food for a family through a hard winter, could secure alliances between groups, could serve as bride price or tribute. The tanners held power through their specialized knowledge, though it was a quiet power, not the loud dominance of warriors or chiefs. They were essential, and in being essential they were valued. Their craft recognized as vital to the survival and comfort of the entire community. But like all things human, like all things living, this way of life could not last forever in the face of change and innovation. Agriculture came slowly to the wetlands, bringing with it new ways of living that did not require constant movement with the herds and seasons. Permanent settlements grew where once there had been only seasonal camps, and with permanence came specialization and the first stirrings of what we call civilization. The tanners continued their work, but now they might trade their leather for grain they did not have to gather, for pottery they did not have to make. The reed beds themselves began to change as people drained some wetlands for farming, as populations grew and demanded more land for crops and cattle. Yet the craft survived, evolved, became part of the new agricultural societies that were slowly transforming the face of the earth. The fundamental techniques remained the same for thousands of years. The soaking and scraping and smoking that our Stone Age ancestors had perfected. Even today, traditional leather working uses methods that would be recognizable to those ancient tanners who worked beside the whispering reeds. We have added chemicals and machinery, but the basic process of using tannins to preserve hide has not changed in its essential nature. This is the third lesson the reed beds teach us, that some innovations are so fundamental they become permanent parts of human culture. The wheel and the lever, fire and fermentation, the preservation of hide through tanning. These are technologies that transcend individual cultures and epochs. They are part of what it means to be human, part of our species' toolkit for survival and flourishing in a world that does not easily give up its resources. When archaeologists excavate Mesolithic sites near ancient wetlands, they find the evidence of this craft in layers of earth and time. Scraping tools worn smooth by use, the chemical signatures of tannins in soil samples, the rare preserved fragments of worked leather that somehow escaped decay. Each find is a connection to those nameless workers who stood at the water's edge and transformed death into something useful and lasting. Can you imagine the satisfaction they must have felt, pulling a finished hide from the tanning pool, soft and supple and ready to be sewn into something needed? That moment when skill and patience and knowledge combine to produce something that would help their families survive another winter, another year. This is the human story in miniature, the endless struggle to push back against entropy and decay, to make order from chaos, to create meaning from mortality. The reed beds still whisper today in the few wetlands we have not drained or destroyed in our rush toward modernity and progress. They whisper of a time when humans lived closer to the earth, when survival depended on intimate knowledge of plants and animals and seasons. They whisper of the tanners who worked there, whose hands were stained dark from tannins, whose backs ached from bending over hides and scraping tools. They whisper lessons about patience and observation, about learning from nature rather than trying to dominate it, about the value of traditional knowledge. In our age of plastics and synthetic materials, of mass production and global supply chains, these whispers seem faint and distant and easy to ignore, but they carry wisdom we may need again. Understanding of sustainability and balance that our ancestors knew in their bones and blood. The stone tools remain, silent witnesses to human ingenuity, to the moment when we learn to transform the world around us through skill and knowledge. The reed beds remain, though diminished, still filtering water and providing habitat, still holding in their roots the memory of those who worked there, and somewhere in our collective human memory, deeper than words or writing, we carry the knowledge of those ancient tanners forward through time. They taught us that survival requires not just strength or speed, but patience and skill, observation and innovation, respect for the materials we work with. In the end, the greatest lesson to read, Bed's Whisper, is this: that human hands, guided by knowledge and patience, can transform the raw materials of existence into something beautiful, useful, and enduring across the vast sweep of time.